was money. They were broke. And what saved her was the arts and crafts movement in Britain. You may not know anything about the arts and crafts movement, but it was founded by a well-to-do English philanthropist named William Morris. William Morris, he had money, he was a good family, he was a writer, he was a designer, and anomalously, he was a socialist. There weren't many rich socialists in Britain at the time. Now, I'm speaking now of the 1880s, 1890s. And William Morris, he hated the factory system. He hated the idea that people were spending their lives in factories under terrible conditions, making, and this is what really annoyed, standardized products, boring standardized products. So what Morris did was to set up a number of workshops where people worked with their hands and they produced handmade goods, wallpapers, tapestries, furniture. Nothing was made by machine. And these workshops were very popular, but they didn't take on. I mean, Britain was in the throes of the Industrial Revolution. And Morris was a utopian, he was a visionary. But even though it didn't take on in Britain, the idea crossed the Atlantic. And it was taken up in various parts of America, but in the East by a woman named Helen Mowat from New York. The Montreal shopper did more, and Grace Helen Mowat, who had a keen business sense, said, no, you're not going to get them, actually you're going to keep them and sell them here. This obviously took some time. But she was on her way. She knew she could produce a product which was very desirable and would make her money. So that's how she started. And she started with very clear ideas. She in talking to the craftspeople around her, she made it clear she wanted only handmade products. She wanted them to reflect the life and the landscape of Charlotte County, and she wanted them made from natural materials, in other words, wool. So what she did was she bought a car. I mean, she was tremendously energetic. She bought a car, and in the spring went around the farms, and sheep were being raised on farms in those days. They aren't anymore. And she bought woolen fleeces from the farmers, brought them back to Beach Hill. There was a sort of shed behind the house. You'll see some of this on the slides. And she washed the wool, took it to a woolen mill in St. Stephen. I'm sorry, she didn't wash it. Yes, she washed it. She took it to the mill in St. Stephen, where it was spun into threads. Threads for weaving and threads for knitting. Brought the spun wool back to Beach Hill, where she dyed it in vats. And she made the dyes initially from vegetable products. She wanted everything to be all Charlotte County. And having dyed the wool and dried it, she then took it out to the knitters, weavers, and so on in the country. And the business has prospered, just flourished. And I think when she probably made quite a lot of money. But profit wasn't her objective. Her main objective, well, first of all, she needed to make a living for herself. But she also wanted, as Jackie pointed out, to improve life for farm people. Because farmers were cash short, terribly cash short. The market for woolen goods had collapsed because the people who were working in the woods, the shipping industry had died. There was no market, or very little, only a small market for woolen clothing, woolen goods. So Grace Helen Mowat filled that gap. And for the first time in their lives, farm women, for most of them, they had a cash income, small cash income. But more than that, they had recognition. And I think this was terribly important to them. They'd all lived anonymous lives, and suddenly the things they made were being appreciated, not just by local people, but by people from afar. Obviously, the market was with summer tourists. And Grace Helen Mowat started by selling what the crafters made from the front of Beach Hill House, from the parlour of Beach Hill. But she soon outgrew, the business soon outgrew the house, and she had to move into town. She moved first of all into the building now occupied by the Leather House, and then she bought the building where Chestnut Hall, now the home of the Ross Museum. And there she stayed until the First World War. I want to say, I think Jackie inferred this, that she had larger ambitions for Charlotte County and the town than simply producing woolen goods that summer tourists would buy. Not to dismiss that, because it did provide valuable income, but more than that, she wanted the farms to survive. And people were leaving the farms in droves in the 1920s. So she thought hard about about getting people to stay on the farms. And in order to get them to stay, of course, they needed a cash crop. Farms are always cash poor. And she came upon the idea, I don't quite know how it happened, of flax. And I think this was her, as brilliant as Cottage Craft was, flax was an even more brilliant idea. It didn't work, but that doesn't matter. The great supplier of flax, up until the end of the First World War, had been Russia. And at the end of the war, Russia was in a state of collapse. The flax industry was floundering, and so so Russia stopped exporting flax. So there was a great shortage of flax in Western Europe and in North America. So Grace Helen Mowat, sensing this, she badgered, first of all, CPR executives who were legion here, and also the government, to promote flax growing on the farms. She spent 10 years trying to promote flax as a cash crop on Charlotte County farms, because the climate of Charlotte County is suitable. It's cool, damp summers, good for flax. The soils were okay. And she even got the government to install what are called retting machines for separating the flax threads from the stalk. She went to huge lengths, wrote endless letters, went back and forth to Waterloo. Sadly, the enterprise failed. Farmers couldn't grow it on a large enough scale to make it worthwhile for people to promote and market it. The flax idea died. And it was a huge disappointment to her. But it was, you know, a very admirable effort. Anyway, Cottage Craft itself, the wool business, prospered through the 20s and the 30s. It even flourished during the Depression, and this surprised me when I was reading. the tourist industry in the Maritimes and in New Brunswick, it increased during the Depression. And this is something that startles most people. It startled me when I first read it. And the reason is that the people who were most affected by the Depression were the labourers and the artisans. They were first out of work. They were destitute. But the middle classes, many of the middle classes, still had jobs. And if they had jobs, they could buy Model Ts, the Model T Ford. And that's what saved the tourist industry in the Maritimes. Americans in particular, and people from Ontario and Quebec, they came here in their Model Ts. And and numbers increased, so did profits. So Cottage Craft did very well during the Depression. But what brought it to a halt, or a near halt anyway, was the Second World War. Because the Second World War, during the Second World War, both governments imposed gas rationing. And this killed literally the motor traffic. Also, people during wartime were very apprehensive about spending money. So industry declined, sales declined, and Grace Helen Mowat was forced to sell Chestnut Hall, and she moved into a small shop on Water Street. It used to be called the Hole in the Wall. It's next door, it's a tiny shop next door to Fred Armstrong's. And it's now part of Fred Armstrong's shop. And there she kept open until the end of the war. By now she was 70 or so and ready to retire. And she actually gave the business, in effect, to two friends of someone she'd worked with at the Halifax Ladies' College. And the sons were Bill and Kent Ross. She had almost no inventory by this time. She had no building to sell. So what she bequeathed to Bill and Kent Ross were the craft workers in the country. She had 50 to 100 loyal craft workers who were willing to knit and weave and sew for Bill and Kent Ross. I think no money exchanged hands, or so little money that it didn't matter. But what was exchanged was the promise that they would give her a small stipend for the rest of her life. I suspect she didn't need the money, but it meant that she was still involved in the business. Anyway, it was a very happy changeover, takeover. And at the end of her life, Grace Helen Mowat, she turned back to things that interested her when she was a young woman. She painted, she drew. As you'll see, she was very talented. She wrote books. And she also, at the very end, acquired an honorary degree. The UNB awarded her an honorary Doctor of Laws. Bill and Kent Ross drove her to Fredericton to receive the degree. They were great friends, actually. And on the way back, Bill Ross told Diana that Grace Helen Mowat, she put up her feet on the back seat of the car, took out a cigarette, she smoked, and said, "I guess I'm becoming famous by degrees." She was not what she seemed. She was the sort of picture of respectability, but there was a kind of racy side to her. I tried to introduce this in the book. Diana did none of it. She said, "No, you can't do any of that." I was going to keep this for them, but I'll tell you now. Diana spoke at great length with Bill Ross in particular, and Bill said that his fondest memory of Grace Helen Mowat, where she was now probably in her 80s, and she said, "I went up one evening to Beach Hill, and Nell, as they call her, Nellie, she was sitting on the floor of the entrance hall, with her back to a heat register. And around there, she was writing Christmas cards. And from her lips dangled the cigarettes. And I begged Diana to let me put that in the book, to let me finish the book with that, because it's wonderful. But Diana would have none of it. She said, no woman wants to be remembered like that. She'd be cross with me now for telling you this, but it's a story I sort of can't keep to myself. Anyway, oh, Wilma. Hey! Anyway, she had clearly a very successful life, a wonderfully successful life, even though she may not always have been what she's seen. Now I have here some slides which I'll go through quite quickly because you've been sitting a long time, listening for a long time. If it gets boring, start hand clapping. Or light your cigarettes and that'll get us all out of here. Okay. Well, this is great. This is Beach Hill Farm, of course, with the pavilion in the background. And I don't know how old Grace Helen would be there, 1920, something like that. And it's the photo that's on the cover of this book.